I want you to understand who my wife is before I tell you what my daughter-in-law did to her. Diane is the kind of woman who shows up early, not because anyone asked her to, not because she needed the credit. She just shows up. She drove 4 hours to help our son move into his first apartment in Calgary, spent the whole day hauling boxes in July heat, and was back home in time to water her garden. She never mentioned it again. That's who she is. She's been that way since the day I married her, 31 years ago this past September. I'm not someone who talks about himself much. I'm 62. I spent my career as a site supervisor for a construction company in Sudbury, and before that I worked the floor. I'm not a man who is comfortable describing his feelings out loud. But something happened last Christmas that I keep turning over in my head, and I think I need to get it out. So here it is. Our son's name is Nathan. He's 34. He works in finance in Calgary. 5 years ago, he married a woman named Brooke. Brooke is, how do I put this carefully? A woman who is very clear about what she wants. That's the generous version. The less generous version is that she moves through the world, expecting things to be arranged for her comfort, and she has never fully understood why other people's comfort should be factored into that equation. I didn't always see it that way. In the beginning, I thought she was just confident. I told Diane that. Diane looked at me in the way she sometimes does, patient, saying nothing, and I understood that she had already seen something I hadn't. The first few years, it was small things. Brooke would make comments at family dinners that landed a certain way. "Oh, Diane, you made the salad dressing yourself? That's so old-fashioned, I love it." Or she'd arrive at our house in Sudbury and immediately rearrange the chairs in the living room to suit her preference without asking. Small things, the kind of things that, if you mention them, make you sound petty. So Diane didn't mention them, and because Diane didn't mention them, Nathan never had to take a position. I see now that this was a problem. Not just Brooke's problem. Ours too. 2 years ago, when our granddaughter Poppy was born, Diane drove out to Calgary and stayed for 3 weeks to help. She cooked, she cleaned, she did the laundry, she did the 3 a.m. feeding shifts so Brooke could sleep. She didn't ask for anything in return. She was just being a grandmother, she said. When the 3 weeks were up, Brooke handed her a list of things she still needed done and said, "I know you said you're leaving Thursday, but I was hoping you could push it to Sunday." Diane pushed it to Sunday. I'm telling you this so you understand. This had been building for a long time. Last October, Brooke texted Diane about Christmas. Not Nathan. Brooke. Nathan was presumably at his desk doing whatever it is people in finance do. Brooke sent the text at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. I know this because Diane read it to me that night after dinner, sitting at our kitchen table in Sudbury, with her tea going cold in her hand. The text said, "Hey Diane, so excited for everyone to be together this year. I've been planning out Christmas dinner, and I have a vision. I'm going to send you the menu. Just let me know if you have any questions about preparation. We're thinking dinner at 5, so you'd want to get started by 9 or 10 at the latest. I'll have the kitchen clear for you. There'll be 22 of us this year, because Chad and Lindsay are bringing the Petersons. It's going to be amazing. 22 people, 9 o'clock in the morning." The menu that followed was a separate text. It came in 3 parts because it was too long to send as one. I'm going to read it to you because I think you need to understand what Diane was looking at. Prime rib roast, honey glazed ham, goose. She wanted all 3 proteins. Then, roasted garlic mashed potatoes, scalloped potatoes, sweet potato casserole with the pecans on top, green bean casserole, glazed carrots with ginger, roasted Brussels sprouts, Caesar salad, cranberry sauce homemade not from the can, Parker House dinner rolls homemade, Yorkshire pudding, gravy real gravy please, not from the packet, a traditional Yule log cake, butter tarts, and a pavlova. 16 items for 22 people, starting at 9 in the morning. In Brooke's kitchen, where Diane would have been a guest. Diane sat at the table and she read the whole thing twice. I watched her face. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just got very still, the way she does when something has actually hurt her, and she set the phone down face first on the table. I picked it up and read it for myself. There's a feeling I've had a few times in my life. Once when a guy on a job site talked to a younger crew member in a way that was designed to humiliate him. Once when I watched something unfair happen to someone I couldn't help in that moment. A kind of low, spreading anger that doesn't announce itself. That's what I felt reading that menu. It wasn't even the menu. It was the word vision. Brooke had a vision. Diane was the instrument of that vision. There was no would you be able to, or we'd love your help if, or even God forbid, A question mark. It was a kitchen assignment, sent to my wife by text at 9 in the morning in October. I put the phone back down. I said, "What are you going to do?" Diane said, "I don't know yet." I said, "What do you want to do?" She looked out the window at the backyard. It was dark out. Just the yard and the fence and the maple tree we planted when Nathan was 7. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I don't want to cook Christmas dinner for 22 people in someone else's kitchen, while Brooke sits in the living room talking about her vision." I said, "Okay." She said, "But Nathan." I said, "What about Nathan?" She didn't answer right away. That was the thing neither of us wanted to say out loud yet. Nathan was in that text too, even though his name wasn't on it. He had to have known what his wife was planning. He had to have seen that menu, or heard about it, or been asked whether this was reasonable. And if he'd thought it was unreasonable, he would have said something before it got to this point. He hadn't said anything. I let it sit for a few days. I thought maybe Nathan would call. Maybe he'd say, "Dad, I know Brooke sent you guys that menu, and I think it's too much. We're going to scale it back." Maybe he'd say, "Mom, Brooke gets a little enthusiastic with her planning. Please don't feel obligated." Maybe he'd say literally anything to indicate that he had seen what his wife had sent, and he thought it needed addressing. He didn't call. After 4 days, I called him. I kept it calm. I said, "Hey, we got Brooke's message about Christmas. That's quite a list." Nathan said, "Yeah, she's really excited about it this year." I said, "It's 16 dishes, Nathan, for 22 people." He said, "Mom loves cooking, though." I want you to sit with that sentence for a second. Mom loves cooking, though. As if that were a complete and sufficient response to the situation. As if the fact that Diane occasionally enjoys making a Sunday roast meant that she had no threshold for being taken advantage of. I said, "Your mother loves cooking. She doesn't love being handed a catering contract for someone else's dinner party." He got quiet, then he said, "Dad, Brooke's been looking forward to this for months. She's really stressed about making it perfect." I said, "I understand that. And I'm saying that the way to make it perfect is not to hand your mother a 16-item menu and expect her to execute it by herself starting at 9 in the morning." He said she wouldn't be by herself. Brooke would be there. I said, "Doing what exactly?" Silence. I said, "Nathan, I need you to hear me. This isn't about whether your mother is capable. This is about whether it's reasonable to ask it of her, and I'm telling you it isn't." He said he'd talk to Brooke. He didn't call back. A week went by, then 10 days. I told Diane what Nathan had said. She listened. She didn't say anything about it. She just asked me if I wanted more coffee. That was when I knew she had already made a decision, even if she hadn't said it yet. I had too. The Saturday before November ended, I sat down at my laptop and I looked at flights to Victoria. Diane has a university friend named Paulette who moved to Vancouver Island 15 years ago. Diane and Paulette talk on the phone every few weeks. They hadn't been in the same room in almost 4 years. Paulette has a house 20 minutes outside Victoria with a wood stove and a view of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. She'd been asking Diane to visit for a long time. I booked 2 return tickets, Sudbury to Toronto Pearson, Toronto to Victoria, December 23rd out, December 30th back. I used the air miles we'd been collecting for years. The flights were completely free. Then I called Paulette. I told her we were coming. I told her why. She was quiet for a moment, and then she laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a real one. And she said, "Tell Diane to bring her Goodwill's wool sweater. We're going for a walk on the beach on Christmas morning whether it rains or not." I didn't tell Diane right away. That evening I made dinner. Nothing fancy. Just chicken thighs in the cast iron with some vegetables the way she likes it. I opened a bottle of the Niagara Pinot Noir we'd been saving, poured us each a glass. She looked at the wine with one eyebrow raised because she knew we didn't just open that bottle on a weeknight, I told her. I said I'd booked the flights. I said Paulette knew and was expecting us. I said we would be sitting in front of Paulette's wood stove on Christmas morning, and we were going to miss the whole thing. Diane set down her wine glass. She looked at me in a way that is hard to describe. Not surprised, exactly. More like relieved. The way someone looks when they've been holding their breath for a while, and someone finally told them they could stop. She said, "Nathan." I said, "Nathan is a grown man. He can figure out Christmas dinner," she said. "Brooke is going to." I said, "Brooke made her choice when she sent that menu. We're making ours." Diane was quiet for a moment. She picked up her wine glass. She turned it slowly. Then she said, "Okay." That was it. Just okay. We told no one. December 18th, I wrote a card. A real card, not a text. I addressed it to Nathan and Brooke both. I wrote that we hoped they had a wonderful Christmas, that we were sorry we wouldn't be there this year, and that we had other plans that had come together. I said we'd call on Christmas Day. I wished them well with the dinner. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I didn't offer a reason for the other plans. I just said we had some. I put the card in an envelope and mailed it. Canada Post, first class. Estimated delivery December 22nd or 23rd. We'd already be in the air. The week before we left, Diane bought Paulette a gift, a bottle of ice wine from Inniskillen and a book she'd been meaning to send her. She packed her good wool sweater like Paulette had said. She found her waterproof hiking boots at the back of the closet, the ones she hasn't worn since we went to Tofino years ago, and spent an afternoon conditioning the leather. She hummed while she did it. I hadn't heard her hum in a while. I noticed that. We flew out on the 23rd. It was one of those cold December mornings in Sudbury, where the sky is white and the ground is frozen, and everything looks like the world is holding still. We had a 4-hour layover at Pearson, which we spent drinking mediocre airport coffee and reading. Diane finished half a novel. I watched planes push back from the gates. At some point, she looked over at me and said, "Thank you." I said, "For what?" She said, "I didn't say anything." I just reached over and squeezed her hand. We sat like that for a few minutes. Paulette was waiting at Victoria Airport with a sign that said Sudbury's Finest, which made Diane laugh in a way I haven't heard her laugh in longer than I'd like to admit. Paulette's house was everything she'd described. The wood stove, the view, the smell of something good already in the oven when we walked in. She'd made a pot of turkey soup from a bird she'd roasted the week before, and there was sourdough bread and good Ontario cheddar and a bottle of wine breathing on the counter. We stayed up too late that first night, the three of us. Paulette told stories about her time teaching in Whitehorse before she moved out west. Diane talked about a road trip we took years ago when Nathan was 12, when we drove to Cape Breton and got spectacularly lost somewhere near Baddeck and ended up eating lobster rolls at a picnic table in the rain. I told a story about a work crew I managed in the 90s who I've never stopped thinking about. Good men, everyone. The wine was finished by midnight. Christmas Eve, Paulette made tourtière. Real tourtière, from her mother's recipe, with the cloves and the allspice and the lard pastry. We ate by the fire. Outside, it was raining softly against the windows, the way it rains on the island in winter, quiet and constant. I don't think I felt that at peace in years. Christmas morning, we walked on the beach. It was raining as promised, not heavy, just that fine West Coast rain that gets in everything. The strait was gray-green and moving. There were eagles. Diane and Paulette walked ahead of me on the sand, and I watched them, their shoulders almost touching, talking in the easy way of people who know each other so well they don't need to perform. At one point, Diane threw her head back and laughed at something, rain on her face, and I thought, this is what I should have done years ago. Not just now. Years ago. We had Christmas dinner late in the afternoon. Paulette had made a standing rib roast, modest and perfect. Not 16 items, just one beautiful thing with roasted potatoes and a green salad and a good bottle of Okanagan Red. We ate slowly. We didn't rush. My phone buzzed at 6:47 p.m. It was Nathan. I looked at the name on the screen. I put the phone face down on the table and picked up my wine glass. Paulette and Diane were talking about something, I don't remember what, and I let myself back into the conversation. The phone buzzed again. Same number. I turned it over, declined the call, and set it back down. Then a text came through. I read it under the table. "Dad, where are you guys? Brooke is really upset. We've been trying to reach Mom. Can you please call?" I put the phone in my pocket. Diane caught my eye across the table. She'd noticed. She gave me a small questioning look. I shook my head very slightly. She understood, and she turned back to Paulette. I called Nathan back later that night. Not right away. After dinner, after Paulette had gone to read, after Diane was in the bath with the door closed. I sat in the kitchen with my tea and I called. Nathan answered on the first ring. The first thing he said was, "Dad, what happened? Brooke couldn't reach Mom all day. She's been really..." I said, "Nathan, your mother and I had other plans for Christmas this year. We sent you a card." He said, "A card? Dad, we had no idea you weren't coming." Brooke had to scramble. She didn't have. I said, "I sent the card December 18th. That gave you 5 days' notice. And the plans have been in place since November." He said, "You couldn't have called?" I said, "Your mother and I were available to speak about Christmas plans since October. When Brooke sent that menu, I called you. You said you'd talk to Brooke. We didn't hear back. We made other plans." Silence, I said. "How did dinner turn out?" He said, "Not great." Brooke tried to make some of it, but it was too much. The roast was dry. Mom's the one who… He stopped himself. I said yes. Another silence. Then he said quietly, I should have called you back. I said you should have. He said, I didn't know what to say to Brooke. I said, Nathan, your mother has been showing up for this family her whole life. She drove to Calgary to help when Poppy was born and stayed 3 extra days when she was asked. She has never once said no. Not once. And this year, your wife sent her a 16-item menu for 22 people, with no question mark, no thank you in advance, no offer to help, just a list. And when I tried to talk to you about it, I was told that your mother loves cooking. That was the end of the conversation. He didn't say anything, I said. Your mother loves a lot of things. She loves you. She loves Poppy. She loves making things with her hands and feeding people who appreciate it. She does not love being handed a catering assignment and being expected to feel grateful for the opportunity. He said, I hear you, Dad. I said, good. I want you to hear me. We were quiet for a moment. Then I said, Merry Christmas, Nathan. He said, Merry Christmas, Dad. I hung up. I sat at Paulette's kitchen table for a while, listening to the rain on the roof and the distant sound of the water through the window she'd left cracked. Then I rinsed my mug out and went to bed. Diane was already asleep. I stood in the doorway for a second. The room was dark and quiet. I could hear her breathing. I went to sleep. The rest of the week was easy and unhurried. We walked a lot. Paulette knew a trail at Whitty's Lagoon that she'd been saving for us, and we hiked it on the 27th. Muddy in places, cold, the kind of beautiful that only the island does in winter, when most of the tourists are gone and the place belongs to itself again. We stopped at a bakery in Langford on the way back and sat in the window with coffee and cinnamon rolls and watched the traffic. Diane had her book. Paulette and I talked about very little for a long time. It was good. Nathan texted a few days after Christmas. He said Brooke wanted to apologize. He said she understood she'd overstepped. He said he hoped we could talk more in the new year. I showed Diane the text. She read it and handed the phone back. She said, we'll see. I didn't push it. That's her call to make. We flew home on the 30th. Sudbury in winter is nothing like Victoria in winter. It's hard and white and cold in a way that has no softness to it. But it's ours. We've lived here for 30 years. I know every corner of it. When the cab pulled into the driveway and I carried the bags to the door, Diane stood in the cold for a second before going inside. Looking at the yard, the maple tree, the garden sleeping under the snow, she said, good trip. I said, yeah. She went inside. I brought the bags in after her. She had the kettle on before I'd even got my coat off. I don't know exactly what comes next with Nathan and Brooke. I don't know what that apology looks like in practice, or whether anything actually changes. What I know is that Diane and I spent Christmas the way we should have, together, unhurried, with someone who was glad to have us. What I know is that this year, for the first time in a long time, she hummed while she packed, and I'm not going to forget that.